After the events of the witness protection family, or should I say what was left of the family, things became more difficult for me. The creature imitating the father was still on the loose, but word was slowly starting to spread. My main priority was to find this creature before anyone else fell victim, or before it became common knowledge that something lurked just on the outskirts of town. I had to make a difficult decision. I needed to eradicate this evil and fast. I then proposed to the rest of the sheriff's department that we needed to take this head on before things got worse for the town. If we waited and let this evil come to us, then it'd be too late. At first, I asked for volunteers to come with me and comb the cornfield, and then the woods. Naturally, the entire department had declined to get involved with my proposal. However, I then held a small meeting with the department, sharing with them my alternative if no one volunteered. I obviously couldn't force them into following me into that field, but I also needed help. I told the department to meet me after work for a mandatory meeting. One of the perks of being the sheriff is that people tend to listen to you when you ask them. The meeting started, and I think the department knew where I was going with this. I sat up front on one of the desks and just folded my arms. Most of the department had either been initially involved or knew enough about the witness protection family case to not to want to be personally involved any further. I started the meeting bluntly and told them the truth. Look guys, I either get 4 volunteers or I have to open this up to the public, I said as a convincing bluff. There was no way I was going to actually do that and open it to the public, but I was desperate for help. I waited a few seconds and thankfully my bluff worked and I was able to get the 3 of the 4 volunteers I asked for. That was one shy of what I wanted, but I was willing to make do. Thank you for volunteering, I said almost sarcastically. The rest of the meeting we went over my plan. I was going to hunt down this creature before anything else had happened in this town. Preferably before anyone else knew what was happening out in that cornfield. My plan was simple: comb the field, make it secure, and then search the woods for the creature. The witness protection family had since been relocated, so the home would be our base of operation. The meeting ended, and the next day we would start our hunt for the creature. Those that didn't volunteer would have to work a bit short-handed in town, but nothing ever happened in this small town, so they'd be fine. Those of us willing to brace the unknown out in that field arrived at the witness protection family's home the next morning, in a sobering realization. Even myself, upon arriving, considered calling off the search due to the sheer eeriness that home emitted. A sense of evil had left its filthy stain behind, whether physically at the home or mentally with those involved. I for one knew what we were getting into, or at least I thought I did. Those that volunteered, I am sure, felt the same way. The old brick home still had the police tape lightly covering the perimeter, as well as some of the doors and windows, making the home look like a Halloween prop at a haunted house attraction. I removed the tape on the front door and began bringing in bags of equipment. The equipment I brought in were a couple of laptops that we used to tap into the already installed security system that this family had. Aside from the laptops, I also brought in weapons for us to use on the creature. The weapons were slightly outdated, but worked all the same. The 3 volunteers that came with me were all deputies that I was actually pretty good friends with. Roger was my closest friend and a skilled hunter. He was one of those guys that would take a week off to go hunt bears up in Alaska. I think he primarily used a bow when he hunted, but thankfully he left the bow at home. The other 2 deputies, Stephen and Bryson, were good guys from my church that I had known for some time. Stephen also happened to be the husband of my wife's best friend. Bryson was an odd duck. He was a couple years older than I was and would often butt heads with me more than anyone else, but he was a good guy. I think he mentioned that he had a rough time when he was younger with the law, but left that all behind him when he was born again. I obviously did a background check on him before making him a deputy, but nothing came back that made me think otherwise. Nonetheless, despite being slightly short-handed, I felt like this crew was the one to get things done. We brought with us a set of walkie-talkies as well as a police radio to communicate with the officers that stayed back at the department. We spent the morning getting set up in the security system. This surprisingly took us some time. The home was obviously empty, but that event that cursed this home still seemed to provide a dull glow of remembrance. The team, including myself, didn't seem to want to do anything alone. We made sure to pair off when we did do anything that could potentially cause us to be separated for any amount of time. While it was still daytime, we made sure to comb the cornfield for any signs of that creature. We made sure to do this before lunch so that we wouldn't be too full or too sleepy. I know how these guys operate. Promise them food afterwards, and they'll do the hard task. If not, then it won't get done. To be fair, I did fall into this category as well. We walked out to the cornfield that looked much more withered than before. It was clear that the farmer that used to take care of this field had no longer been providing care. It was as if the farmer knew better than to step out into that field. The stalks were tall but provided much less resistance and fell over quite easily when pushed. We made sure to walk in a line practically shoulder to shoulder, so that for one we wouldn't miss anything, but also to make sure that we wouldn't get separated. It didn't take us long to find where that one intruder had been killed. The forensic team had done a pretty good job cleaning up, or should I say gathering what remained of the evidence, but there were still some brown spots on where the stalks had been knocked over. The area was a significant clearing that looked like whatever got the intruder had thrown him a couple of times. We didn't stay long as we were trying to get through this field as quickly as possible, since we were all hungry. We pressed on for 15 more minutes before we were all overcome with this intense smell of metal. Burning metal, to be exact. My first instinct was that there was a tractor that had broken down out in this field. However, the smell seemed to take on a different form that was unlike anything I'd ever smelled before. We all looked at each other and stopped in the middle of the field. We were all armed, but didn't have anything drawn until now. I pulled out my custom AR that wasn't police issued off my shoulder while everyone else did the same. It was noontime, so the visibility was clear, but it didn't matter. The corn obstructed our views that were more than 5 feet in front of us, so we were all at a disadvantage. Instead of relying on sight, we followed that horrendous smell. We knew that whatever was on the other end of it was something that we didn't really want to see. About 30 seconds later, we stumbled across what I can describe was what remained of a person that had gotten hit by a train. Parts were everywhere. Limbs were detached but were accounted for nearby. The head was missing, but we could surmise that with the clothing of what this person was wearing, they were either homeless or a drifter from another town. No one from this town would ever come close to this field in fear of ending up as this person did. The blood covered the area was now black, but the body was slightly warm and still soft. This meant although the body wasn't a fresh kill, it was somewhat rather recent though. "It's a good thing we haven't had lunch yet," Bryson said while gagging. The smell was intense, so we didn't stay long. We tried to radio in what we saw, but the radios only worked so far from the station. We tried looking for tracks, but the matted cornstalks prevented any real tracks we could ever follow. However, Roger saw something with his hunter's eyes. A small trail of blood could be seen heading in a certain direction, which eventually led us out of the cornfield and into the adjacent woods. It didn't take long for the blood trail to lead us to a decapitated head of a man that was impaled on a tree branch leading into the forest. His face was twisted with horror, and his mouth was wide as if he had died, screaming. "Okay then," I said. Yeah, we're gonna take a lunch before we go in there," I said to the group. They all agreed and let out a sigh of relief. The walk back through the cornfield was much quicker this time. Whether it was because of the prospect of food hung in the air or we still felt vulnerable, we made sure to leave a clear path that would lead us back to the head after lunch so we could investigate more. Before we got lunch, we obviously called in the body, and the coroner came out and picked it up. At this point, we were certainly starving. I offered barbecue for lunch, but everyone got nauseous at the thought of pure meat after seeing the body of that one man. We eventually landed on pizza and had Steven go pick it up in town. Steven set his gun down on the kitchen counter and went out the back door and around the house to one of the police cruisers. We waited for Steven to get back and we sat around the house just goofing around on our phones. About 30 minutes later, while we were waiting, we heard a single bang on the back door. We did order 3 pizzas for 4 people, so Steven had his hands full. He was probably struggling to open the door while holding all the pizzas. I motioned for Bryson to open the door, and he begrudgingly got up to help. When he opened the door, he didn't move. Instead of Steven walking in with the pizzas, Bryson walked out the door and bent down. He yelled for all of us to come over in a panicked voice. I could see on the open door a smudge of blood dripping downwards. I glanced over to Bryson to see that he was crouched down to the very same decapitated head that we'd seen out in the woods. Something had thrown that head at the door. "What are we dealing with?" Roger said. We all glanced at the cornfield and knew that this evil had been watching us all day. Steven arrived a few minutes later, and we were all still outside, looking at the cornfield. He walked up to us, not noticing the head until he was practically on top of it. Once he noticed it, his reaction was much like Bryson's, panicked and vulnerable. "All right, let's get back inside." The rest of the day we were on high alert as we watched out the windows and prepped for another plan to get rid of this unwanted creature. We brainstormed different ideas such as hunting this thing at night, getting a posse from the town, and even using live bait. Roger thought of baiting a trap, but other than people, I had no idea what this creature ate. How would we bait it? Another suggestion we considered was to simply not allow people to come to this side of the town. People already knew not to come over here, but if we blocked the only road coming in, then perhaps that would be enough to starve this creature out. But then the creature would only make its way into our town. We need to kill this thing, and fast. We figured that this creature had some kind of den of iniquity in which it would sleep. Most, if not all, living things need to sleep at some point, right? Our best bet was obviously the woods, since it could actually make a structure out there. The cornfield was just its kill box. If we could make it through the cornfield and into the woods, then we could bait its den or something. We decided as a backup measure that we would gas the cornfield, and if we had the chance to trap it out there, we would then set the cornfield on fire. Night eventually came, and we had just finished putting gasoline on the perimeter of the entire cornfield. This way it would hopefully act as a wall of fire and keep the creature inside to die. We debated on whether to hunt this thing at night. I thought that regardless of the time of day, that we were going to be at a disadvantage, so why not utilize a good portion of the day? I figured this thing would probably need to sleep. We waited until midnight just to make sure that this thing had enough time to sleep. There was a chance that this thing could be nocturnal, but if we stuck together, then we'd have a good chance of at least getting back to safety. Midnight struck, and it was a moonless night. Normally, the beautiful countryside would be illuminated with flecks of celestial light. However, it felt as if the heavens themselves were closed by clouds. The sky was pitch black and made our endeavor all the more terrifying. The only comfort that we were given came from one another and from our weapons that we carried. The first part of the hunt was crucial. We needed to maintain stealth until we cleared the high crops in which we believed it hunted. Once out of the cornfield, we should be okay. To make sure that we maintained maximum stealth, I told the group, no flashlights. We began our hunt and entered the sea of crops that made the already thick darkness all the more smothering. Alongside the lack of light, there also appeared to be silence. No crickets chirped. No distant dog barking off in the distance. No random cars driving down the desolate road that led to the cornfield. Just nothing. As we marched through the cornfield, I made sure to keep accounts of all the sounds that we were making. Every few minutes, I would make sure to stop the group. I would do this to try to catch any sounds that were not made by us. It was hard to hear as we all marched in the noisy crops, practically drowning out everything else. I halted us and we all stopped. We waited to hear anything, but luckily nothing followed. I did this a couple of times, and the first 4 times, nothing made a sound. However, the 5th time that we halted, instead of complete silence, we heard the sound of nearby crops moving, only for a few seconds. We all pointed our weapons in that direction. "It's here," said Roger in a whisper. Bryson, being a hothead, pulled out a Zippo lighter and flicked it on. I shouted in a whispered tone, "Stop, stop, stop, stop! We don't know if that's the creature, and we're also still inside the cornfield. Don't do it." Bryson looked determined as he was terrified and also wanted to be the one to kill the creature. He clearly wasn't thinking effectively. Everyone agreed with me and tried to stop Bryson. "Bryson, you need to listen to me. We need to make our way out of the field first, and then we'll talk." Bryson hesitated, but finally flicked off his lighter. All the elements of stealth that we tried to maintain so hard were slowly being diminished by the second with this guy. Only a couple more 100 yards and we'll be out of the cornfield. At that moment, our fears were confirmed and the creature screeched very loudly, causing all of us to panic and run into different directions. A few seconds later, I finally cleared the field and began looking for others. I found Roger and Bryson, but Stephen was nowhere to be found. Oh no. Roger was about to go back inside, but I had to stop him. "Let's wait. We don't know where he is." As I was talking to Roger, Bryson pulled out his lighter again. "Whoa, you can't do that now. Stephen's still inside." "No, the thing will be trapped and Stephen is probably dead anyways," said Bryson. Bryson bent down to light the field and I pushed him back, causing him to drop his lighter, thankfully on the grass. I bent down to pick up his lighter and put it in my pocket when I looked up to see Bryson was now pointing his gun at me. "You want that thing to get away, don't you?" Bryson said. "Hey, let's take it easy," Roger said behind me. "Not only are you using us as bait, but you're also trying to feed us to it, aren't you?" "Bryson, you're scared, I understand that. But why would I do that?" I responded. Before Bryson could give a response, Stephen emerged from the cornfield, causing Bryson to lose his concentration for a split second. Roger was quick and rather brutal in disarming Bryson with a quick pull of Bryson's gun and a hard punch to his face, smashing his nose. "What's going on?" Stephen said in shock. "Why was he pointing a gun at you?" "I don't really know, to be honest." Right when I said that, out jumped the creature, grabbing Stephen by the back of the neck and pulled him back into the cornfield. The creature moved so fast that I failed to capture a description of the creature. Roger and I were in complete shock and took us a few seconds before we started firing into the cornfield. Stephen's screams were loud and gut-wrenching. Roger and I both fired in the direction we thought that the creature had taken Stephen, not thinking about if we were to hit Stephen with any of our shots. His screams were becoming more distant. As it sounded, he was being dragged away. Roger looked at me once the screams had stopped. "Do we burn it now?" he asked. I nodded and lit the lighter and tossed it into the cornfield. The perimeter that we had doused with gasoline had immediately caught and began to spread around the circumference of the field, creating a tall wall of flames. I looked back to where Bryson had been laying to find that he was no longer there. I guess we will worry about him later. We waited by the field for a few minutes as it slowly began to burn inwards towards the center. It didn't take us long for us to hear the creature shrieking off in the distance. I think the creature realized that it was trapped. "Well, I guess that takes care of that," Roger said, as he stood beside me watching the field burn. The shrieking continued, but we slowly began to hear a familiar sound that both brought relief, but also a realization that we didn't consider. It was the sound of a fire truck siren off in the distance. I guess we figured that we were so far away from the town and off into the countryside that we didn't even consider alarming the fire department to tell them not to put out this fire. Someone must have saw the tall flames of the fire. "We can't let the fire department put it out before it kills the creature," I said to Roger. Out of desperation, we began running around the cornfield, but since the perimeter was burning, that we couldn't run through, so we had to run all the way around it. The sirens were much closer now, but we still had a great distance to run before we could make it back to the house. After 20 minutes or so, we finally arrived to where the truck was, but it was too late. A chill went down my spine, but I also began to feel sick at the gruesome sight that laid scattered next to the fire truck. The firemen not only put out a good portion of the fire, but it appeared that whatever we had trapped in the field had gotten out and killed all of them. Roger and I looked at one another with a look of grief and sorrow. We didn't say a word to one another. We just nodded as if we both had the same thought, to go back out into the woods and finish off whatever this thing was. A good portion of the cornfield had yet to be extinguished, so we kept to the outside of the field again. The fire of the cornfield illuminated a good portion of the evening sky, but the corn didn't burn for long. It began to get low again, almost as if to remind us that the night was still dark and not over. We hiked into the woods using our flashlights, and I had Roger lead the way. He was searching for tracks while I covered him to make sure that the creature didn't jump us. Roger finally caught sign of some type of track. Next to the tracks were smoldering ash and debris. Roger and I looked at one another and I said, maybe the fire actually damaged the creature. We followed the trail and we could see that it led us to one of two things that were equally horrifying yet mesmerizing. Firstly, the dying creature with most of its skin burnt and a pinkish flesh remained. The second thing that we saw, but we didn't quite understand, glimmered like the waves of a dark ocean, is what looked like a purple portal that spun slowly and counterclockwise. Firstly, we dealt with the creature. The creature was not human, but its body greatly resembled one. The head of the creature was that of some kind of dog or coyote. Its eyes were black, but still tracked us as we approached, but its wounds prevented it from being able to get up. Roger went over, stepped on its torso, and unloaded a mag into its skull. The creature was safely dead. Now our focus was on the strange fabric of reality that glowed. "What do we do?" asked Roger. I had never seen anything like this before. I reached my hand into the portal, and I could feel my hand dematerialize, but it wasn't painful. It was like entering my hand into a strong current of water that felt cold. I guess we'll check it out. If we don't like it, we can always just come back. Roger and I both readied our weapons and entered into the portal together. I expected this portal to take us to some dark land or even an extension of hell, but when we went through, a bright light met us and we finally materialized on the other side. We weren't on a different planet or in hell, but rather a lab. A lab operated by both humans and strange-looking aliens. Neither the aliens or the people noticed us at first until we moved. Right then, an alarm went off and the lab lights changed from white to red. The intercom then buzzed on, alerting the lab. Unauthorized personnel in the teleportation room. Notify Director Borsky.